Hello, my name is Bean, and today I would like to show you a little bit, or show you, talk a little bit about RESTful web services and why I got the idea about RESTful web services. JAX-RS for this conference. Well, I saw a lot of projects and applications this year, and for unknown reasons, everywhere I saw as a text the term RESTful or REST, but it wasn't RESTful at all. So what I would like to do is to write a little bit code, and I prepare also some projects and show you some new JAX-RS 2.0 features. But I would also like to talk in general about JAX-RS. I will use the Twitter handle. You can use the Twitter handle JEEConf, AirHacks, or AdamBean if you like to ask questions live. So it worked pretty well in the past, so you can just do it. So I have opened my Twitter here, and so you can just ask me questions about whatever you like, not whatever you like, about RESTful web services. So on that note, we can start with the slides. So the first slide is, of course, the title of the talk. I'm a freelancer, and I really enjoyed working with Java and programming in the Java programming language. And I have to say, actually, the recent years, all my projects were JavaEE projects, and this year I'm in the lucky situation to be in some projects with JavaEE 7 and Java 8. Last year it was exclusively actually, it was Glassfish, Tommy. This year it is Whitefly, Tommy, and Glassfish. So it is getting better and better. So I actually never worked. I was also freelancer. So some developers suspect me to work for Oracle, whatever, but I actually never worked for Oracle Sun. I was just always on my own. Yeah, there's some references. So I blog from time to time, and Twitter handle you probably know already. And 3 times a year I organize a workshop week at Munich Airport. So with lots of underneath from all over the world. So if you like, come for 1 week or for 1 day to Munich. So there's different workshops on each day, something else, but everything is JavaEE and web and HTML5 related. Okay, 2 books, so loosely related to this topic. So in both I mentioned REST, but it's not about RESTful exclusively. So what is REST? How it is defined? And this is actually where trouble begins. So the definition of RESTful web services is really clear, right? If you read it, this is like a representation state transfer. REST is a software architectural style consisting of a coordinate set of architectural constraints applied to components, connectors, and data elements. So actually, what is a little bit interesting here, you see the hypermedia term. So it is somehow hypermedia related. So at least you should find some links or identifiers. And RESTful is not about HTTP, but usually it is. I have to say, in all my pragmatic projects, I would say, actually in all my projects, we use REST with HTTP, of course. And I would like to widen the definition a little bit, because I think you could be RESTful just using the HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete, and so forth, with a really ugly API. And what I think is more useful to think in REST in terms, or to provide more usable and domain related API. This is what actually brings the benefit. And there's another term. This is really hard to remember. Hate OS. It is called hypermedia as the engine of application state. And this is a little bit crazy, because from my perspective, it goes too far. It would be like you are providing a set of, or you are returning a resource to the client with some links, and the client is able to parse the links and just using exclusively the information from the resource to interact with the server. This would be the highest possible REST normalization, if you will. And I actually never saw that in action, or we never built a JAX-RS client which automatically parses the links and does something with it. So we always relied on the existing information about some kind of contract, but the idea is nice. And I would say if you would use 20% of the ideas in HTOS, it would be already nice. So as you can see, this was the last slide. So now everything, I think, should be clear, right? So we actually covered the whole theory behind REST. So we can stop right now. I will just quickly look at the Twitter, whether there are some, there's only, this is someone asked me about something JavaEE related, but not JAX-RS. I will skip the question for a second. Yeah, and someone watches from holiday, the Mainardi Davide JAX-RS, which is actually a nice. So JavaEE is exciting enough to be watched on vacations. Okay, now how to start with JAX-RS. So I will just create a very basic project, and then I prepared something, and I will then go through my examples and show you some newer stuff what you can do with it. And the examples are based on frequently asked questions, of the most frequently asked questions. So I would start a very simple project, a Maven project, with the Maven archetype which I created. Why I created it? Because I think it is the simplest possible Maven archetype for JavaEE 7. And this is why I did it. And I would call the project RestDev. Nice name, RestDev. So probably it is obvious to the conference attendees of JEEConf, but it is unfortunately not that obvious for my project. So what people end up with is putting everything to WebXML, which is actually not required. So what I created right now is a POM.xml, a very lean one, and what I created here, property fail on missing WebXML false. What it means, WebXML is actually not needed. The project will build without having a WebXML. So what it actually means to have RESTful web services, you will have to do something, and you will have to create a configuration class. And I will go here and say RestDev was our application name in a node boundary. I'll do it, yeah, RestDev, and then JAX-RS configuration. hex RestDev JAX-RS configuration. Simple class, and this simple class, it extends application and application path. And now the first question is what to write here. So what happens here is you will have to create an URI, a URL, and this URI here will be appended to the name RestDev, and the RestDev is the var name. So the whole URI is going to be RestDev / something which was here, so like resources, for instance, and then the resource name. But resources is like, or web resources or services or whatever, sounds right, but the problem is it's actually superfluous, right? Because you could, and my resources is just you could write utility or whatever you like. So the question is, why not to put a version number there? And this is really interesting discussion, because in my eyes it really depends whether this is best practice or not, whether you can influence the clients or not. So if you're rolling out the clients together with the backend, you could actually use the version number here, because on each change of the version, you could control the clients and roll out new clients. So whatever the client may be, whether this is a web application, so single page application, JavaFX or whatever. But if in internet environment, so how it's called, web scale environment, it is a little bit harder. So if you change the version here, it will be really hard to notify the client that there is a new version. So I think it would be better in web scale to put here something generic, which is not version related at all, like resources happen to be in a very thin best practice. And And what it means, the URI becomes stable. So whatever happens, it will be no change on the URI. Now the question is what to do with versioning. And what I would say, this is actually a larger discussion, but in a web scale environment, if you're building really a web service for the internet, not for the intranet, I would say your API have to deal with different versions. So you will have to accept older and newer clients at the same time. It causes a little bit trouble with, or no trouble, more efforts with testing. But I think it's a good idea to do it. So now the application is set up, and I just watched very quickly a Twitter. And font bigger. Font bigger. Of course, we can make font bigger. So as you can see, oh, this is already 18. Java developers are already a little bit older, so they need a bigger font. I think now we have a huge font. So JEEConf, I think now the font is huge, right? And I get a really nice question for Carl Kidden, but this is actually nothing to do with JAX-RS. I will promise I will answer the question in the next AX QA, or if you have some time here. So now it's configured. So what to do next? So the next would be to create a class, right? And the class would be, the name is developers resource. And the developer resource is annotated with path. And the name is always plural. So the question is why? So why not developer? And what I see a lot is like developer service, what I think is conceptually wrong, because in my eyes, what you should do is you should address the set of all developers with the resource, and then you can query for a single developer or all developers or whatever. But I think the first mistake is to attempt to use JAX-RS for remote procedure call, like replacement of IOP. And if you would really like to write your own JAX-RS RESTful layer to replace remote procedure call, I would model this remote procedure call, and like I would use the resource called invocations, and the ID would be a method name or service name. Then you can model the actual remote procedure call. So, and then I can just return for test string developer, and of course I have no idea who is the most famous developer in Kiev, but I think we can go with Duke is neutral. Actually, Duchess and Duke. So two developers, which is actually right, because developers is all developers, Duchess and Duke. So get returns two developers. And with a little bit of luck, it could work. So I will try to run the application, which will build, I will use the old Glassfish. It is sufficient for a purpose. With Whitefly, it would work as well. And Tommy as well. It's not okay. So I did something before with Whitefly. And just the next time I will reboot my machine before a conference talk. We'll run it again and see what happens. So let's see whether there are some. No, Bertha. Why I don't see you and your talks at JEEConf this year? Ah, this is not me. This is someone asked the Jacek. I think you see me right now. Okay. So what happens here with Glassfish? Did something work? If not, I would just repair everything with this. Oh, it worked. I was too fast. Oh man. Okay. With work window. So just do it again, serve as Glassfish and run it. Sorry for this, I was just too fast. I just killed everything because before Whitefly shut down and Glassfish was started. So let's see whether it works this time. Has to. So any questions so far? I think it is obvious. Actually, it is absolutely obvious, but for unknown reason, it's not that obvious in the projects. Oh man, I have lots of projects here. This is the problem with Glassfish. But we have here resources and developers, I think. As you can see, it works, Duchess, Duke. This, I think you need larger font here as well. So now we have a nice web service. What I only have to do, well, it's okay. If it works, it works. So RESTF. So this was the simplest possible RESTful web service. And so we have JAX-RS configuration, developer's resource, and nothing else. There is no WebXML, nothing there. So web app, web-inf, you see, everything is empty. So that's just the simplest possible JAX-RS application comprises two classes, JAX-RS configuration and at least one resource. So if this would be all developers, then you can also address a single developer with, let's say this is developers and developer. And it looks exactly the same, so you can use your template and see even first name or first and last shorter, so you can create your own pattern here. First and last. Pass parent is first string first and pass param last, and I can just return to show you that it actually works. Return first, last. So how it would look like: developers, chief, Duchess. And I forgot, of course, get. So we have path get. I think we will run it and then see what happens. Remember. So this would return resources developers, and path param is chief Duchess, and it doesn't work. Developers, does it? This does, and this should. First, last. Path param looks good, but it doesn't work. But it has to. It's absolutely right. So, and just rerun it, it has to work. I think it looks right. So I forgot the get. You see, developers, chief, Duchess seems to work. Yeah, perfect. I think there's some interaction on Twitter. So let's see what the news. Nice. Hey, lots of developers there. This is like millions of them. This is like twice as Java 1. Just kidding. Okay. Good quality. So perfect. So good quality of the broadcast, not of the code, I hope. So so this is how. So what we actually returned is text plain, right? It's a little bit boring. So what you of course could also do, and this is the next surprise. This is absolute basics here. You could actually return the developer, and it is sufficient to put root element here the accessor type, and this is always field in my case because I don't like getters and setters, and they become optional here. Private, what was it? Private string name, and we have also, let's say, last name, and we need a constructor, and a constructor. This is the constructor for the sake of JAX-B, and a constructor with 2 parameters, and this should be sufficient. So what we could do here in developer's resource, I could return here the actual developer, and of course not here, sorry, this would be not right. So this is the talk about best practices, a little practices with JAX-RS, so we should do it here. Return new developer with name and last. So this would be, look this way. Let's try this. And you can see this is XML. So you get it for free. And I could go here and say -h accept application /JSON, and you get JSON back. So the JSON binding is almost mandatory in JavaEE 7, but was not mandatory in JavaEE 6, but it worked in most application servers. In JavaEE 7 comes with JSON object, so you can use you can rely that this, what I'm showing you right now, would work with JavaEE 7 as well. By the way, there's a small typo. I would just use the first. So now she chief last 42. Works, perfect. Works as usual. Now, I hope no questions. This is just basics, right? So, and if you would like to change something, you can absolutely do that. You can say here, XML element is name is first name, and this becomes first name. So. Basics. Agreed? So a very good question from Christian Lopez. The REST resources wraps the boundary in an ACB architecture. What it actually means is, what I'm skipping today is the following. So this is just, in my eyes, is like a protocol adapter. It doesn't actually matter whether we use JAX-RS or not. Usually, I would have here the real boundary, and I would call the boundary developer, manager, developer service and manager, stupid names, but something business-like, and I have no idea right now, so we'll call it developer service. And the developer service would be a regular boundary. It's an EJB always. Why? It's different talk. And this would manage all developers, and I could inject the developer to the developer's resource. Why? Because usually it's not as easy as what I show you right now. You would like to use, for instance, HTTP headers, for instance, and you could use the HTTP headers in your code. And the problem then is this is harder to test. You will have to mock out the whole JAX-RS HTTP architecture infrastructure in order to write a simple unit test. So I always separate the JAX-RS part and the facade part, and both comprise the boundary. So if you're in the unlucky situation of using SOAP, you will also split both. So I wouldn't annotate this with web service. I would use a dedicated class to implement the SOAP stuff. So now, in JavaEE 7, I hope, no questions, right? No. You could do the following. So you can say, I would like to return a custom JSON object. And by the way, I do it a lot in the recently, because XML becomes less and less relevant, at least in my projects. So I could say, so I can create JSON objects, and what I can do then, I can just either I have the JSON array, or I can just pick whatever I like from the entities and transport back to client. I would only would like to show you how it actually looks like, and not JSON objects. JSON array would be better, but let's start with object to save time. And this is first name, and this was Duchess build. So now it creates the whole object, and I can return the object. Okay. So how it looks like, if I go here and just use the developer's URI, you see that I got a JSON object back. But now I stick with JSON. There is no more XML. So I cannot just use XML, it's just JSON, nothing else. But this is really convenient if you use, for instance, AngularJS frontend or Ember.js or something similar, or any JavaScript client. JSON object is the way to go. And by the way, this is not right. You should use JSON array, remember. I think it's JSON array. Yes. Remember, the developers represent the set of developers. And here we get a certain developer assuming that this is the actual key, which is actually not right. Usually you would use a technical key, but in our example is good. I just wanted to show you a little bit more complicated. By the way, you could use here even regular expressions. So JSON array, similarly, so there's JSON.create array builder, and I can just use this here, and this creates an JSON object, and here I can add the object and return the array. Still basic what I show you, but and build. But for unknown reasons, there's lots of confusions in projects about this. And you can see it's nice array. So, and this is actually a nice, small, nice interface. Okay. So we have developers about the idea about REST. So to shorten the time a little bit. So what we have here, we have developers. The idea is you get all developers back. How developers look like depend on the application. You could return, for instance, XML, JSON, or serialized Java object. It depends on your client. So developer's ID would return a developer with a ID, which is technical. And then you can traverse, okay, I would like to see the programming languages of the developer. Let's say length. So now I would get a list of all programming languages the developer is able to program. And then with Java, you would get the reference to Java programming language. So the idea is that you actually just looking at the URI, this is actually what I try to do in my projects, just to looking at the URI, I know what is going on. And this is, for me, the REST in the enterprise or REST in intranet. So if you have a cryptic URIs, it's still RESTful, but less useful. So I will call this a useful REST, right? And why? So my idea is the URIs should be self-explaining. So if you show this to a business or a domain expert, they could derive just from this without any documentation what is actually going on here. And the most criticism of REST is what happens, get, post, put, delete. There are the actions. What happens if I would like just, to train all the developers? So it cannot be expressed here with train. So how to express train in JAX-RS? And the trick is, usually you don't have to think in verbs. You have to think in substantives. So what you should do is, or in resources, instead of modeling train as an action, you should modeling the training or workshop as a resource. And then becomes easy again. You can say, hey, developer, Duke, you need some training, and you can post to the resource developer Duke training a resource which a training resource, and so register developer for training. And if you would like to cancel the registration of the training, so you can also equally say registrations for training, right, for JEEConf. you could say, okay, I would like to unregister from the conference, which is probably no more possible, but how to approach this? Well, if the registration is a complex process, we need here, registration or cancellation is a complex process, I said it already, you will have to model cancellation, and now you can, with post, create a new cancellation with get the status of your cancellation. This is actually a nice trick, and no, nice trick is not a trick. It's a REST, usable REST, and and this is what I see very rarely in projects. Instead, I see something like everything is get, right, and there is a methods or def action. I think is action equals register. And this is ugly, and I think even SOAP is better than this, right? Okay, so by the way, how to use this? This would be a query parameter, which should be optional. With this query parameter, you can refine the query. This is actually the idea behind this. Okay, I think this is the basic idea of REST. So, or my understanding, and I try to do this. To be able to do this, you have to be really savvy in the target domain. And a good news here, the domain experts also are thinking in the resources. So I have here notification from Twitter. Let's see whether it is actually something interesting. Just jokes. Not joking, asking. You have to ask me questions. Okay, so we have now JSON array, which returns all developer, which is a single developer, right? So how to approach, how to go with, what is the next point? So the next point is how to deal with exceptions. Just imagine this would throw an exception. Let's say, throw new runtime exception. Actually not this, but what usually happens, we inject here a service, and the service throws on a runtime exception, and how to deal it with here. Let's say, no, all developers are at JEEConf today. No developers. So this is the exception. If I invoke this, I get a really nice error and status 500. And the next question is how to deal with exceptions. So one of the most frequently asked questions. And there's a very old, or what it means old, Java 6 days class was called exception mapper. Runtime mapper, runtime exception mapper. I will just show you how it works. This is really nice. Oh, runtime exception. I thought runtime exception mapper, of course. Exception mapper. Implements exception mapper, and I would like to map the runtime exception. And what you should not forget is provider annotation. And now what I have to do, I have to return a response. Status. We can create whatever status we like. We would say actually status server internal server error is not that bad. Actually, in our case, it is server error. But what you can also do now, I think I have to import something, right? Yes. So now, what I always do, I create a header with additional information, like reason, and you could say reason is get message, and you can usually you would create exception ID and stuff like this. What I would like to skip. So, and this I will create the response and return this. Provider, see whether it already works. You see, X reason, all developers are at JEEConf. It worked. So I could also say, no, it's actually not an error. It is perfectly fine. And you can see no strange output. It's just okay, but all developers are at JEEConf. And this is actually what I do, not with the 200, which I actually also see a lot. What I see a lot, they get always 200 response code, regardless whether the exception happens or not, which is also a little bit off, I would say. So I think we have some Twitter interactions, so let's see what happens. Securing the application. This is not a good one, a good question, but a little bit boring. The nice story is with JAX-RS. JAX-RS, in fact, is just a servlet which reacts actually to reflection. And what you can always do, you can create in WebXML defined J2E security, and then what you can do, you can say, okay, resources get is can be accessed by anyone, but resources.post just by a particular user. And by the way, I wrote a whole article about this, and I'm being J2E JavaEE security, and this was Java Magazine article. Where is it? It's a Java Magazine with the E, so it's a free, you can download the PDF. And in this article, I'm doing exactly this. I'm creating a realm and show you how to deal with JAX-RS, but it is really basics. It's like you can use the standard J2E security, the old J2E security to secure RESTful web services. Okay, I hope I answered the question. So, and this is a very good one from Oleg, the question. This is really nice. What are the use cases to use SOAP instead of REST? And I would say if you have already SOAP in place, for instance, a classic one is if you have old legacy systems like ZOS or AS400 or whatever, it is usually very easy to expose your own native stuff like SOAP procedures. Then I would use SOAP for integration purposes. But I would never use, or never, yeah, I personally would never use SOAP as a de facto standard in the internet. No one uses SOAP anymore. Yeah, okay. SOAP is no more that popular, I would say, so I express it that way. Okay. Resource links, no, I didn't cover resource links so far. So in stateless, Sebastian asked, what about if you would like to be stateless on the server side? You can, I mean, the JavaEE security is somehow stateless. What you will need, you have to choose what you usually use, how it's called, base authentication, the easiest one. So you have to use the username and password, hash it is base64, and then use, of course, SSL communication between client and the server. But if you're using SSL, this is no more really stateless, because there is a handshake between the client and the server, so you have state in place. Perfect. Okay. I think we covered now exception handling. This is a secret weapon exception mapper. So again, this was the case. Usually you wouldn't do this. Instead, you are accessing injected resources, sorry, injected services like boundaries. And if you're accessing them here, you will what I see a lot, try catch, exception catching, a lot of stuff. And instead of this, you can just define common exception mappers in a central place. It works usually well. With EJB, it's a little bit harder because EJB tend to wrap all exceptions. So you will have to unwrap the exceptions in the runtime exception mapper or EJB exception mapper. Okay, I think we covered this. And I think this is so far the basics. Then I will try to show you some nicer stuff, so which I prepared because I already suspected the time it will be a little bit hard to get everything explained in 1 hour. So sub resources, extremely simple, but actually I see it really, really rarely in my projects. So we have JAX-RS configuration again, beans resource, and now there is something different. So if you look at this, it's the following. There is no get, no post, nothing. it is just path. If you're doing this, the bin resource is not going to be serialized in XML or JSON. It has to be a resource itself. So if you skip the HTTP action here, the return type has to be a resource. So if I click here, you see this is actually a resource. Request code, produces, and so forth. What I did to show you something, this is a common problem. This sub-resource called bin resource needs an ID and just has one constructor. But I would like to access the headers here. So you see there are the HTTP headers. And now we have the problem, because if we construct the sub-resource here in this place, the class, nothing is going to be injected there. And this is why JavaEE 7 introduced resource context. I think in JavaEE 7 it was not in place in JavaEE 6. Resource context. And now you can say resource context init resource, bin resource, and now this class becomes managed by JAX-RS runtime. So what actually means this HTTP header is going to be visible. So if I run this, I think I use Whitefly. Yes, now Glassfish is running, so I will use Glassfish. Actually, it doesn't matter, but if I would choose Whitefly this time, I'll get port config again. I will have to kill Java again, which is not nice at Java conference. So, does it work or not? If it takes too long, I will skip to the next one. My machine is a little bit overtaxed with all the streaming and everything running on the machine. So, did it actually work? Clean and build. It doesn't matter, and it will work. So this is actually exactly the same example with. So you get actually the point. Why sub-resources is extremely crucial in JavaEE projects. Without sub-resources, you will end up having here, millions of paths and subpaths, and this is no kidding. I know resources from real-world JavaEE project which are 5,000 lines of code. So it's just crazy talk. So instead, what you can do to navigate from resource to resource, just use sub-resource. Again, what it is, a method returns a resource and is not annotated by get. On the container does, it delegates to the sub-resource. I hope it is clear. So no question from Twitter. So it means for you crystal clear. Hopefully, is this new? So it has to be new because this is really rarely used in projects. Instead, they're using all combination of path and subpath. The next classic one, or not classic, this is actually a little bit harder because not harder. It is JavaEE 7. It was not available in JavaEE 6. Let's imagine the following. I have a method post beans, which returns the 2 beans as a list. And what I would like to do is, I would like, this doesn't matter here. I would like to introduce a container request filter. And what the container request filter is able to do is something like an interceptor in JavaEE 6 or in CDI or EJB. And the annotation pre-matching is really interesting. So this is going to be executed before the container matches or chooses the action on the server. So what I can do, I can say, whatever the client executed, set the method to post. What's nice with it is, for instance, you could the client could send post request and you can set it to put, which should be, for instance. So there was lots of discussion on the internet, how to deal with proxy servers sometimes, or old browsers. Sometimes they don't get delete, put, or whatever. So you could use container request filter to override the methods after the fact. So although the method was put, you can override it to or even get. You can always override it to post. So you have the complete control over lots of things. So you can swap the stream, even request or inject security context and lots of stuff. So this is actually a little bit AOP. So this was pre-matching with container request filter. Container request filter. And there is something like an interceptor, something similar. And it's called writer and reader interceptor. They're actually both. There is writer and reader. So there is outbound and inbound. So there is a reader, and the reader the request comes from clients as on the server, and the writer is the other direction. So what you can do, usually it wraps the resource mapping. So you get here the access to the entity and to the stream. It's also new in JavaEE 7. In JavaEE 6, there was only message body reader and message body writer. And with message body reader and writer, you could very easily use your own protocol. So you could use your own, you can introduce serialization here. So this is also new stuff. Reader interceptor and yeah, to intercept the traffic. So filters. It's the same example with filters. So I have just get on post, exactly the same example from before, and I would like to log all the requests. And what I can of course do without pre-matching, I have just here I can intercept the whole traffic and log everything out. Or I was asked recently, I would have to have access to HTTP headers for authentication tokens. You can do it absolutely in container request filter. So this is a very simple example of the pre-matching. Pre-matching was like, changing get to post using container request filter. And this is a very basic example. So you have access to the get header string to the headers, for instance, and you can use security authentication information, do something with it. So even more interesting is dynamic feature. So what dynamic feature actually is how it's called, dynamic feature. And what it does is you can configure stuff. So in this case, what I did is depending on something, you could use, I don't know, environment, time, system properties, whatever, and you can decide whether to register, for instance, a request logger, which happens to be container request filter. So the difference being is, if you would like to log everything, you could put provider annotation on it. We had it already, and provider means it gets applied to everything. But with this, with the dynamic feature, you can decide on something whether you would like to deploy message body readers, writers, whatever you like, dynamically, which is really nice. For instance, in debugging case, you can intercept the whole traffic, and in production, or if everything is okay, you can just skip it. Of course, you will have to redeploy the application or restart the server. Oh, I got some questions, sorry. Is there any way to make a request asynchronous in JAX-RS? Yeah, of course, and this is actually very, very easy, so I can show it right now. So how to make it asynchronous? Void. I will skip this and say suspended async response, and then I will just delete the exception and say response.resume object. And the nice story is what I could do as well. I can say response dot set timeout, and I would say 1 day is a little bit hard. But response dot set timeout handler, and you can register timeout handler here. And what you can do here, you can say, okay, in case timeout occurred, I will take the async response and write an appropriate HTTP code back. So of course, JAX-RS is not only JAX-RS 2 is not only asynchronous from the client side, from the server side, but it's also absolutely asynchronous from the client side. So the client is also asynchronous. So this is how it would look like an asynchronous invocation. What asynchronous actually means is that the method is executed immediately, and you don't have to wait until something happens. This is actually the method is completed immediately and without blocking a thread. And you could pass the async response to someone who an asynchronous EGB or whatever, which fills the response in asynchronous way. By the way, I recorded a little screencast about this. So if you go to YouTube and you will see, watch the screencast with complete level future to see it in action completely asynchronously. So on that note, so what I wanted to mention but didn't is usually I don't use this. I always return a response. So it will look like response.status. And in this case, it's okay, of course. I think it's entity, yes, entity, and I will just return the developer here. Build. New developer build, looks good. So this is a little bit boring. A little bit more exciting it would be if we had a post method which creates a developer. I think we are a little bit off time. So the question to the organizers, how much time we have, I will hack a little bit. If you are no more interested, you can just leave the room or something. So the question is, if you have any questions, ask, and the organizer can block me at any time. So, return response. What's wrong with, this is, I would say, save developer. And I could pass the developer here. Developer. And now, if the developer is created, I could return response dot, and now a little bit interested, created with the URI dot build. So, and this will return 201, not 200, 201 with a location header, which is really nice because on the client side, you will see, okay, now the developer is created and is available under this URI, and the whole header creation happens automatically behind the scenes here. So, how to do this? I think I could do something like this. Context. I think URI info. Right, yes, info. And there was something with builder, get absolute path builder. Add, no path. And I could say ID and system current. Usually we'll use ID from the database. Build. I think this is, looks good, URI. And you would return the URI here. And this is wrong. So let's see whether it actually works. So developer, what developer? We only need the developer data to do this. So can we do this? Developers. Let's try this. Okay. So I would use the Duke chief, and this is my developer. And now I could say curl minus x post minus the data, and the URI is, I think, this one. Let's see whether it works. What is the problem? Oh, I forgot something. Minus h content type is application slash JSON. Wow, it worked. So do it again. What you see right now, developer is created, and what you get back is location. You can see developers with the ID. This is not actually, we could create something really nice. So we could say not this, rather than make it really RESTful and return something like Chief Duke. And of course, you know, getting it from the actual request. Let's do it again. So I get this, and now I could go here and say curl. So as you can see, you get this XML representation of the developer. This is what I meant. So, so there are lots of HTTP codes, and how to deal with it. I would say what I do in my projects, I go to HTTP status code RFC, yeah, perfect. And just look at the codes, and I would use a code which really fits the best here. And this is the basic idea. So instead of inventing something, just look what's already there. And the same note, if I forgot how post or put or whatever operates, just go here and say HTTP post RFC. And the specification is surprisingly lean. If you go here and search for post, for instance, this is everything. So this is the whole specification about post. Look at this, and then you can write better interfaces. So I think our session is over. We could talk for multiple hours. Do you have any questions? Any questions about RESTful web services and stuff? All other questions I was asked, which were not about REST, I will answer them in the next AirHacks QA. It is, I think, June the 2nd. So I will just pick the questions, put to my blog, and I will answer them as well. But right now, I would like to hear whether you have any questions about JAX-RS, JAX-RS 2.0, Java 7 in context of JAX-RS. No questions? Then I would say thank you, and sorry that I'm not there in at a JEEConf. Would like to come, but crazy time. I have lots of deadlines to meet, and just the travel would kill me this time. And I think it worked really well. You are a little bit more quiet than usual. Usually I get so many questions via Twitter that I actually cannot handle them. So thank you for watching, and see you one of upcoming conferences, hopefully JEEConf next year. Java 1, I will be there, or AirHacks in Munich Airport. So yeah, it's behind me. So thank you for watching, and bye.
Спасибо.